Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. US President Donald Trump says Israel and Hamas have reached a deal to free hostages and implement a ceasefire in Gaza. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer meets Narendra Modi in Mumbai as trade, education and the war in Ukraine top the agenda on his first visit to India. And gold prices pause after climbing past $4,000, but investors still bet on further gains. Now, US President Donald Trump says Israel and Hamas have signed off on the first phase of his Gaza peace plan, paving the way for the release of all Israeli hostages and an Israeli troop withdrawal. The deal, mediated by Qatar, Egypt, Turkey and the US, also allows humanitarian aid into Gaza. Israeli and Palestinian leaders have welcomed the agreement, calling it a historic step towards ending the conflict. Watch the moment Donald Trump learned that Israel and Hamas are inching closer to a peace deal as he heads to Jerusalem on Sunday.
Well, they're smart, but they're not smart enough. Oh, my microphone's broken. They're smart, but they're not smart enough. They have been covered by these liberal cities for so many years. And that's why we're all working with Treasury, with all these different departments, to find the criminal conspiracy.
Okay. I'm just given. I was just given a note by the Secretary of State saying that we're very close to a deal in the Middle East, and they're going to need me pretty quickly.
For more on this, I'm joined by Middle East correspondent and author Jotam Confino. Jotam, great to have you on the show. I can actually see that you're live in Hostage Square. People have been celebrating in Gaza and in Israel, just where you are after the deal was announced. Donald Trump currently speaking now, saying Monday or Tuesday the hostages could be released. Do you think this joy is a little bit premature, as there are still so many hurdles to overcome?
It's a good and valid argument, Leigh-Ann, because there's a lot that can go wrong. Until the hostages are actually out, we don't know for sure if they will be released. That's just the name of the game. And we've been here many times before where Hamas and Israel were very close to signing a deal, having a ceasefire, and then everything crumbled at the very last minute. But this time around, it seems different. There are so many countries behind this. This is a comprehensive deal that has been worked on for a long time. It's now officially announced both by Israel and by Hamas. And Donald Trump has actually been invited to speak here at Hostage Square, right behind me, where former hostages are currently taken to stage to talk about their experiences while they were held in captivity in Gaza, and the need to get the remaining 48 hostages out as soon as possible because they are going through absolute and utter hell. So Donald Trump is saying that he's going to come to this region, come to Israel this weekend. He's saying that the hostages should be out by Monday. So it is true that optimism can be premature when there are still several days ahead of us. But at the end of the day, it looks like a done deal. It really does. And this is the feeling around me. Everyone is really joyful and cheering and partying almost. Even though they're a bit anxious, they are very, very cheerful and happy that this is finally coming to an end.
A sigh of relief in Hostage Square. Jotam, we've both witnessed the previous hostages being released. Hamas was criticised for their behaviour during this process we saw in the past. How do you think it will be different this time around?
First of all, we're talking about 48 hostages that have to be released fairly quickly. Hamas doesn't have that much time. First of all, they need to relocate some of the bodies that they apparently don't know where are. That's what we're hearing both on the Israeli side and from Hamas, that they actually don't know where all of the dead bodies are. So this time around, they're under much more stress. They don't have time to put up big stages where they can conduct these circuses where hostages were humiliated last time. This time around, it looks like it's going to be different. They will all be released likely in one batch, The Red Cross is going to be obviously involved. Some of them are going to be flown directly with helicopters straight to a hospital because some of them are severely starved and they are tortured and they need immediate medical care. So I believe this time around it'll be more smooth and there'll be less of a circus.
And let's talk a little bit about Hamas, because it's demanding the release of a prominent Palestinian prisoner, Marwan Barghouti, which Israel has made clear is not going to be happening. But how many Palestinians will be released, and how will this actually be done over the same period of time?
So let's start with how it will be done. They will be released the minute that the hostages are out. That's at least according to Israeli sources. This is how it's normally done, that once the hostages are out, the Palestinian prisoners are being released from Israeli jail. We're talking about more than 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, 250 of whom are serving life in prison for murdering Israelis. And as you mentioned, Marwan Barghouti is apparently not going to be on the list. But this is a name we've been talking about for days now. It's actually more than days. We've been talking about him for a long time because he's seen as a national hero among Palestinians. He's seen as a future Palestinian president, perhaps, someone who can unite the Palestinian factions. But he is a convicted terrorist. And Israel has been very reluctant with releasing him, mainly because he is obviously a terrorist, but also someone who is in Israel is seen as a threat, especially by the right-wing government. The last thing they want is for Hamas and Fatah, the two rival parties, to unite under one new faction led by Marwan Barghouti. For them, that would just be a different packing, a different wrapper, if you want, led by him.
And Jotam, everything I keep on hearing is cautious optimism when it comes to this first phase of the deal that has been signed. How will the next few days actually play out? We have learned today that President Donald Trump will be arriving in Jerusalem on Sunday, as you did say. We anticipate the release of the hostages. We know that the Israeli government is meeting today. There's still a lot of logistical, political things that need to happen.
Absolutely correct. The Security Cabinet is meeting right now to discuss the plan. There's going to be a vote, obviously, on the plan. Technically, this could all fall apart because there has to be a majority in the government that votes for this deal. But I would say I'm 99% sure, as are the rest of the people behind me, as you can probably hear cheering, that this is going to get passed in government because we know which parties are going to vote for and which are going to vote against. As for the next coming days, Israel is going to stop hostilities altogether once this deal goes into effect. Then they will slowly begin withdrawing to a line that has been agreed on between Israel and Hamas that leaves Israel basically in control, at least for now, of still 50% of Gaza. And then there's going to be this huge search for bodies. And apparently Israel, the United States, Turkey, and Qatar are forming a joint sort of, not organization, but a team of people that are going to try and locate some of those bodies in Gaza, essentially helping Hamas doing what they're supposed to be doing. And the reason why they're doing that is simply because it's not just Hamas that keeps hostages and bodies. It's other Palestinian terror groups such as Islamic Jihad and DFLP. So there'll be a lot of things to look out for in the coming days. But again, cautious optimism. And here in Tel Aviv, you hear them cheering and simply being overly happy about the prospects of getting the hostages out.
And Jotam, I also just want to speak to you a little bit about the Palestinian Authority, because they expect a significant role in post-war Gaza, even though President Trump's plan sidelines that for now. This is what we're hearing from the Palestinian Authority. Is the PA able to bank on Arab support to secure this position despite Israeli objections?
I think it's really up to the Palestinian Authority to show that they are worthy of this task, not in the eyes of Israel, in the eyes of the Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority has failed their people for decades. They have taken. Sorry, there was just a child that just took my camera. Sorry. They have really for decades failed the Palestinian people. They are wildly unpopular. So they need to show the Palestinian people, first of all, that they can reform, that they can root out corruption. And for Israel, they need to prove to them that they can stop paying the salaries of convicted terrorists, and also to show the United States that they can do that. So this is really something that I think is in the hands of the Palestinian Authority. If they can reform, if they can show that they are worthy and ready for the task, I think there is a likelihood that they will end up potentially ruling Gaza further down the line.
Jotam Confino, I hope you get your camera back, but thank you so much for joining us there from Hostage Square. For more on this, I'm joined from Tel Aviv by Eylon Levy, former Israeli government spokesperson. Eylon, good day to you. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, how did you feel when the announcement on the first phase of the deal was made last night, emotionally? Eylon, I do think that you're on mute. I don't know if you can hear me, but if you could unmute, that would be great.
Can you hear me now?
I've got you now, Eylon. Thank you so much. So, did you hear my first question? No problem.
I did. Look, today is a day of immense relief in Israel. I was in Hostage Square just a few hours ago, and Israelis are looking happy for the first time in 2 years. It really feels like a huge weight has been lifted off our chests. This isn't over. The war isn't over. The hostages aren't home, and we won't be able to end that sigh of relief until the hostages are home. But the whole of Israeli society has been racked with worry for the hostages' fate, worrying every time we see videos coming out from captivity showing how thin they look, how much they're suffering. And Israelis are really hoping that this 2-year-long nightmare that Hamas started when it launched this war 2 years ago may finally be coming to an end.
And Eylon, our reporter Jotam Confino was also just in Hostage Square. And I noticed something from the pictures that we're getting out of Hostage Square and behind Jotam. There's a lot of people with banners about Donald Trump and thanking Donald Trump for what's happened. And also some people dressed as Donald Trump. Is that who people think has got this deal over the line? Is that who the Israelis believe has made the difference?
Absolutely. This deal to end the war was orchestrated by President Donald Trump and American leadership. They made the impossible happen. Israel has been under immense international pressure throughout this war to pay a ransom for the hostages that would leave Hamas in power. The previous deals would get some of the hostages out and allow Hamas to use hostages as bargaining chips to survive the war. That's horrific. President Trump here put a plan on the table that said, all the hostages have to come out now, immediately, in one go, and then we will negotiate the terms to end the war that Hamas started. This would not have happened if the US had not started putting pressure on Hamas's state sponsors like Qatar and Turkey to get them to bring Hamas to the table. It's been leading the international isolation of Hamas, which has now been left without any supporters that want it to continue fighting. And there is hope in Israel that President Trump really wants to end wars. He wants to bring peace. And I think the Trump plan really gets it. Point one of Trump's plan is de-radicalization. He understands that if this war ends without ending the extremism in Gaza, the jihadi ideology that led people to celebrate October 7th, will be in another round of conflict all over again. So really, there is a sense this is the first American president who really gets the conflict and can really bring the actors together to bring these decisive outcomes.
So yesterday, Eylon, I spoke to Ruby Shen, the father of a hostage who's been in Hostage Square. He told me Netanyahu hasn't done enough for the families of the hostages. He actually did praise Donald Trump for his support. Why do hostage families feel so isolated by the Israeli government?
Yeah, there is a very bitter argument inside Israel about what price the government should pay in order to get the hostages back. Previously, Hamas was demanding a full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in order to get the hostages. It was demanding a right to bring in concrete in order to rebuild its tunnels. And, the Israeli government had two tasks. It has to bring back the hostages, and it has to make sure that Hamas cannot take more hostages in future. So many Israelis wanted to make any deal. Let's just get the hostages back now, and then we'll worry about defeating Hamas later. The Israeli government took a different approach that said, we can't get the hostages back and fight Hamas later. We need one deal that brings the hostages back and defeats Hamas. And I think President Trump's plan, which says hostages out first, and then a withdrawal that is linked to Gaza's demilitarization, achieves those goals.
So, Eylon, we actually mentioned there that previous ceasefire deals have crumbled. Why did Israel agree to this new US proposal? You talked about the hostages there, that being the first point. But do you think it was after Israel's attack on Doha, which failed to kill top Hamas negotiators, or the increased isolation Israel was facing on an international stage, that it didn't really have a choice because the US has always backed Israel, and Donald Trump started putting immense pressure on Netanyahu to reach some sort of agreement?
Quite the opposite. I think it's Hamas that had no choice but to accept this deal. Let's remember, after Hamas started the war, Israel said all we want is for the hostages to be out and Hamas to lay down its arms, and this war can end immediately. This is a deal that gets Israel 90% of what it wanted to achieve. Hamas wanted to hold onto the hostages as bargaining chips to survive the war it started. And this deal is fundamentally different from the plans that failed before. The last time we got hostages out, it was a phased deal that would allow Hamas to keep onto more hostages, to keep onto the bodies, in order to guarantee a full Israeli withdrawal. This was totally different. President Trump told Hamas, you have to get all the hostages out first, and then we're going to negotiate the terms of your disarmament and Gaza's demilitarization. Well, and so Hamas is now left with even the countries that have been backing it throughout this war, like Qatar and Turkey, coming to the table and pulling their weight to say, guys, this is game over. The war you started has to end.
Well, Eylon, I think a lot of people would argue that after Israel's attack on Doha, which did fail to kill top Hamas negotiators, Donald Trump did really step in and try to get some control of what was happening in the Middle East. But I just want to move on to a final question, if I may. The European Union's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, says we're ready to discuss what we can contribute to the peace plan. And this comes as all the international leaders are currently meeting in Paris right now, and we see that happening to discuss their involvement in, I guess, this proposal and the redevelopment of Gaza. Does Israel welcome this offer of help from European countries and other nations?
The most useful thing that the European Union can do to promote peace is to pull funding for UNRWA. You cannot have permanent reconstruction in the Gaza Strip if you are telling most of its residents that it is their home temporarily because they have a right to immigrate and live in Israel. If we are saying Gaza is their home and they need to live better lives there, then you have to end this charade of calling them refugees who have a right to live somewhere else. They need to invest in Gaza as permanent homes of peace and prosperity, and not as a launchpad for more attacks against Israel until they can conquer it from the river to the sea. So the most useful thing the European Union can do is to encourage Gazans to care more about building a new Gaza as their home than about destroying Israel. But otherwise, they're just going to pour money into reconstruction that other people in Gaza are going to see as a temporary base for the eventual conquest of the whole of Israel. They have to build permanent homes and want to live in peace next to Israel.
Eylon, I did notice one thing, that Israel wasn't invited to those talks in Paris. What was the reason for that?
Well, Israel has completely rejected the French president's attempts to meddle in this conflict, which only empowered Hamas and emboldened it and made the situation worse a few weeks ago. At just the time that Hamas needed to be pressured and isolated, here were countries recognizing a non-existent Palestinian state, one they want to exist maybe, but which definitely doesn't, which Hamas was calling one of the fruits of the October 7th massacre, making it think it was vindicated in the choice to go to war. So I think all the diplomatic efforts now need to be focused on the implementation of the Trump plan. Let's get all of the hostages out, and then let's get an agreement that decommissions Hamas's weapons, its missiles, and its tunnels that are underneath schools and hospitals in Gaza, that removes Hamas from power, that replaces it with a civilian administration that doesn't want to wage war against Israel. And that's how we'll start building peace from the ground up.
Eylon Levy, it's always a pleasure to have your insights and analysis on the show. Thank you so much for your time today.
Always, Graham. Thank you, Leigh-Ann.
Pleasure. Let's continue this conversation with Palestinian Ambassador to Denmark, Professor Manuel Hassassian, who's joining us live right now from Copenhagen. Professor Hassassian, it's brilliant to have you back on the show again. So whose success is this, and how much credit do you give President Trump for getting Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas to agree on a plan?
Please, can you raise the volume? I don't hear you very well, but
yes,
I will answer you.
Okay, no problem. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, but your voice is very low.
Okay, no worries. Let's just work on the sound and see if we get that. Any better for you?
Yes, yes.
Oh, brilliant.
Yes.
Okay, great. Glad
Yes.
that you can hear us. Professor Hassassian, it's great to have you back on the show with me. Thank you so much for joining me. So whose success is this, and how much credit do you give President Donald Trump for getting both Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas to agree on this plan?
You know, there is always a saying by Anthony Gramsci, who says there is the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the goodwill. I will discuss the pessimism of the intellect in the 21 points that have been presented by President Trump. I could say that the actual content of the 21 points are meticulously couched in a language that has constructive ambiguity. So why do I say that? Because there is no details in the succession of the terms of the 21 points, because there is no timeline in it. There is no explanation of the details. There are open-ended questions, and the emphasis has been basically on the release of hostages in exchange of political prisoners. So I think this is a triumph for both sides. Let's put it this way. And President Trump could get, of course, you know, the commendation that he tried his best to convince the right-wing extreme government in Israel, with Prime Minister Netanyahu, to accept this as a prelude to a final status conditions, where these conditions might take several years to implement on the ground. And that's why I say, with cautious optimism, I look at this Trump plan with a lot of reservations, especially when it comes to the question of development and the appointment of an international committee headed by Tony Blair is a non-starter, because Tony Blair is considered to be a persona non grata as far as the Palestinians are concerned, let alone the Arab and Muslims, because of his positions on Iraq and what have you. So I would say that this is a prelude which really opens an avenue, hopefully, for peace. And in 6 weeks, we will know exactly what the intentions of Israel are, because there are no guarantees in this agreement by the United States to go with an official timeline that will be according to certain deadlines and move on forward.
Professor,
our experience with Oslo, if I might just make this point.
Yes, of course.
Our experience with Oslo, that was dependent on incrementalism, led to a disaster. And now we consider that incrementalism in this Trump proposal might lead to a second Oslo. And this is my apprehension as a Palestinian, that without guarantees from the United States in every stage of development of this peace plan that will lead to further peaceful negotiations in ending occupation and in ending the conflict and in trying to implement self-determination and statehood, is very ambiguous in this Trump plan.
So, Professor, I have to ask you, why has Hamas agreed to the first phase of the Gaza deal? Because like you said, when we look at this 20-point peace proposal, it answers all of Netanyahu's conditions, and Palestine isn't actually even mentioned once in these 20 points.
Yes, that drew our attention, very much so. And it has been very disappointing that when they put President Trump has consulted the Islamic world and the Arab world before he presented it to the negotiators who were on behalf of Palestine and Israel, or Gaza and Israel, and we were not, as Palestinian Authority, being part and parcel of this act or part of these negotiations, although President Abbas has accepted the conditions with an open heart, that this might lead to the final status negotiations where our independence will be recognized by the United States and that of Israel. But we had reservations because we had no input whatsoever in the 21 points that President Trump has put forward, knowing that eventually the Palestinian Authority, whether they like it or not, and I don't want to say who likes it or not, are going to be part and parcel of the national reconstruction of Gaza, and there is only one authority who would shoulder that responsibility in the future, i.e. the Palestinian Authority with President Mahmoud Abbas.
So let's just talk a little bit about Israel has said that the jailed Palestinian leader Marwan Barghouti will not be exchanged for hostages. Now, Hamas has been calling for Barghouti to come back. We know he's part of the Fatah faction in Palestine. How significant is this? Because we know he's still the most popular politician in Palestine.
Yes, I agree with you. Marwan Barghouti represents the overall mainstream in Palestine, and being in prison for almost now 23 years, that in itself also had portrayed his commitment to national liberation of the Palestinians. But overall, he always maintained the discourse of unity between Fatah, Hamas and the other factions that are in opposition to the Palestinian Authority or to the PLO. That's why he has been, considered to be by the people Nelson Mandela. So the Hamas wanted him because he was one of those who tried to coordinate the coordination and the finishing, the conflict between Hamas and Fatah as a positive leader in the right direction. And since he comes from the hardcore of Fatah with this kind of perception, Hamas has more confidence in him than any other leader. And for that reason, he could be a compromising figure. And of course, the Israelis still believe that he has blood on his hands, and they are still debating the idea whether to release him and to release also the General Secretary of the Palestinian Liberation for Palestine, the PFLP, Ahmad Saadat. And so far, we don't have the list of all Palestinians, but in number, we thought that almost 250 will be those who have been convicted for life imprisonment, and the rest are basically, the 1,700 are basically administratively detained, not hardcore political prisoners where they are considered to be terrorists, as the Israelis claim. So I think he's a compromising figure, and that's why Hamas also wanted to show that there is no difference between Fatah and Hamas when it comes to political prisoners. So here we are contributing his name as a leader of Fatah to be on the top of our list in terms of release of prisoners.
But every time I speak to Fatah, they say they never have negotiations with Hamas. Professor Manuel Hassassian, always brilliant to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Now, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Mumbai on his first visit to the country, calling for deeper trade and cultural ties. The two leaders discussed the war in Ukraine, climate cooperation and India's bid for a UN Security Council seat. Starmer announced new UK university campuses in India. His visit follows the landmark trade deal which was signed in July, which projected to add millions to both of the economies. For more on this, I'm joined by Professor Michael Semple from Queen's University, Belfast. Professor Semple, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. So Keir Starmer was in India today. He did give a speech alongside Narendra Modi, but really his India trade trip seems to have been overshadowed by the news coming out of Gaza.
Yes, but I'm sure that he has focused on his original mission, even if the media is looking elsewhere. Given what's happening in the world with the closing down of some channels of globalization, countries like the UK have to focus on the trade deals they have available. UK and India have signed their trade deals, so now Starmer wants to cement that relationship.
This is Starmer's first trip to India. Starmer says he has secured £1.3 billion in investment. Is this going to help growth in the UK and improve his popularity at home? Because we know right now there's no growth in the UK. We've got this budget coming up in November, and Labour's deeply unpopular in the polls.
Well, absolutely. This is the challenge that he faces. The net effect of the trade deal, the follow-up to the trade deal, the actual pushing ahead with some of the investment plans will be net positive, but nobody is projecting sufficient boost to growth really for it to make much of a change in the public mood. So it can be a talking point in speeches, but it's unlikely that citizens of UK are going to feel it in their take-home pay or overall in terms of the cost of living. So it's something which he has to do, but it's not efficient. It's not sufficient to turn round the economic fortunes of the UK.
Modi has described himself as a friend of Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer has always publicly supported Zelensky in Ukraine. Do you think Britain can ever convince India to give up buying fossil fuels from Russia? This has been a big argument on the table, even between the US and India.
Yes, I think that Modi will feel that he has a sufficiently sort of strong hand of cards, that he will be able to maintain his good relations with UK, with Europe, and also proceed maintaining his relations with Putin and continue to procure Russian oil. So it may well be one of the points for discussion, but I don't think that Starmer will be terribly optimistic at getting any change in the Indian position. And in terms of priorities, Starmer is bound to prioritise trade and investment.
Starmer also pledged his support for India joining the UN Security Council. Are we actually likely to see that happening anytime soon, and what could be gained from it?
Well, this is really a long-term agenda. It's been talked for over 2 decades that and I think that Starmer, in expressing his support for India joining, reckons that he doesn't really have to pay a high price for it. There are no votes going to be taken on this any time in the near future. But what this is about a rebalancing of power inside the global organization. We know that the composition of the Security Council was determined immediately after the Second World War, when the great powers were the USSR, as was, and then China was about to become a rising power. The victorious European powers were France and UK, and it's an irony of history that the power equation from 1945 continues to shape global institutions. It's widely accepted that there has to be a reworking of the Security Council to reflect what has happened over the past 80 years, but nobody expects it'll be possible to get an international consensus on it to get action in the near future. That's why it's a safe bet for Starmer to say we're on the side of the right, clearly just in terms of population, in terms of its global role, as India as a rising power should be represented there, but Starmer doesn't expect that he will actually be involved in a sort of a decisive debate where votes will be taken.
And just a quick thought, staying with India, and Afghanistan's Taliban foreign ministry has also held talks in India today. How significant is this visit between the two countries?
Yes, I mean, I think that one is also interesting because both sides in that visit, the Indian side and the Afghan side, they have an agenda. Amir Khan Muttaqi, the Taliban foreign minister, is working hard to break out of the diplomatic isolation that the Taliban have found themselves in, exploiting the readiness of regional powers like India, the countries in Central Asia, even Iran, to have day-to-day relations with them short of recognition. So he wants, in the first place, to demonstrate that the Taliban are meeting the regional powers at the top level. He would like to get recognition, but he's probably wise enough to know that he's not going to get it anytime soon. From the Indian side, it's fascinating to see them taking a sort of a realist position with active relations with the Taliban, given that they seemed to side so closely with the previous regime, the ones that the Taliban overthrew in 2021. On the one hand, the Indians are acting out their role as a rising global power. They feel that they have to have an involvement in anything which goes on in their region, and therefore whoever's in power in Kabul, they will have a relationship. But also, the elephant in the room in any discussions between India and the Taliban is that this is a game played with Pakistan. It's a competition between India and Pakistan for influence in Afghanistan and for relations with the Taliban. It was always assumed that Pakistan had invested in its support of the Taliban for 20 years as a way of checking Indian influence in the country. Now that the Taliban are in power, India has to a large extent turned the table by developing even warmer relations with the Taliban than Pakistan has at a time when Pakistan is accusing India of supporting the insurgency in Pakistan via its relations with the Taliban in Afghanistan and with the TTP who are fighting in Pakistan. So these items may not actually be on the agenda, but clearly the elephant in the room in the Taliban-India meeting is what's happening with the insurgency in Pakistan.
Professor Michael Semple, fascinating to have your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining me.
Most welcome.
Gold prices took a breather today after breaching the $4,000 level for the first time earlier this week. But it's not cooled interest in the precious metal as many bank on the continuing rise of bullion. For more on this, I'm joined by Mati Greenspan, founder and CEO of Quantum Economics. Mati Greenspan, brilliant to have you on the show. Let's talk there. So as I mentioned, gold has climbed above $4,000 a troy ounce for the first time. But gold's not alone. Bitcoin has also hit an all-time high. What is driving this dizzy rally? Mati, is it uncertainty due to the US shutdown, the inflation crisis that we see across the world? Is it France? Is it the Middle East?
Yeah, there does seem to be kind of debasement trade happening over the last few weeks and months. The government shutdown isn't helping. And overall, we can see the US dollar has been in decline. Just over the last day or two, though, I would say that trade does seem like it might be coming to a kind of an end. We're seeing gold declining today, Bitcoin declining today. Also, I do hesitate to put some sort of correlative relationship between gold and Bitcoin. If you look at the charts, I mean, they don't look at all similar. Gold has been rising very steadily on all of those things that you mentioned, inflation and the shutdown and whatnot. Whereas Bitcoin has been kind of consolidating near the top. for a few weeks now. It did just kind of poke the all-time high 125, but quickly shied below it. And so it's very interesting to see how these type of things are going to play out. And in the future, I think we're going to see over the next few weeks some very lucrative trading opportunities, especially within the cryptocurrency world.
So, Mati, does crypto always go up in October? And is Uptober real? Because I keep on seeing Uptober everywhere. Can you explain what it's all about?
Yes. I think according to the maths, Bitcoin tends to rise in October, especially during the bull runs, where we see sometimes 40 or even 50% in a single month. October is one of the most bullish years for Bitcoin, bullish months for Bitcoin, other than November. So we call it Uptober and then Moonvember. That's usually how it plays out. But as you know, past performance doesn't indicate future results.
And what is Bitcoin's role versus the rest of the market? Because there's always so much interest in cryptocurrency and it's always discussed so widely, even when we see these big banking heads meet. Yeah,
absolutely. There's a lot of value flowing on chain, and that's been a huge driver of price action lately. And yeah, Bitcoin does have a very unique relationship between Bitcoin and the altcoins, as we call them. You can check out, there's a thing called a Bitcoin dominance chart, which basically shows all of the market caps of all the cryptocurrencies combined and Bitcoin's percentage of that. So right now, Bitcoin is at around 60% dominance over the entire market. And it has been rising steadily since 2023. And when Bitcoin's dominance falls sharply, well, we call that alt season because all the altcoins are zooming. That's where you see, kind of generational wealth opportunities, especially with a little bit of leverage that can be applied. Some of these coins, they rise triple or even quadruple digits during these timeframes. So we've just had kind of one of those just now. And right now, it looks to be, the alt season kind of looks to be unraveling by the charts. Obviously, we'll see how it plays out over the next few days. We would expect Bitcoin to become dominant again and start rising towards the 66% level, 68% level, should the trend that's been playing out over the last few years continue.
So, Mati, do you think gold's run out of road? We won't see it climb any higher. Do you think we've kind of reached the top here?
Well, my mother told me when I was young that the price of gold always goes up over the long term, and that's held true, especially since, gold's decoupling with the US dollar. And yeah, so Bitcoin and gold, huge performance can also be seen in part as, the dollar going down rather than those assets going up. I would say that, just according to the short-term charts right now, I mean, we've seen a huge run, and it would be expected for, traders to be taking profits at the moment. But it also is going to depend on the macro environment. If, the U.S. government manages to reopen, would be nice. And we'll see how it plays out in the short term.
Just a quick question before I let you go, Mati. You just mentioned the US shutdown there to me, and we have been speaking to Republicans about it on the show this week, and the concern that it could have on America's economy. Do you think a US shutdown has much of an effect on the economy?
The stock market doesn't seem to think so. I mean, we don't see huge, sell-off or something like that. I mean, the S&P 500 seems to be doing just fine. Cryptocurrencies haven't been phased whatsoever. I think it's politics, and it sucks for those, I suppose, who are reliant on government checks. But I think that, I don't know, I haven't been watching the Republicans you've been interviewing, but I would suppose they're probably just all right with it, as it's giving them, kind of some opportunities within their sphere. So I think that this is all kind of theater, and I don't think it's really affecting the markets too much.
Mati Greenspan, I always think it's good to take advice from your mum. I always do the same thing. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Thanks for having me.
A reminder of our top stories. US President Donald Trump says Israel and Hamas have reached a deal to free hostages and implement a ceasefire in Gaza. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer meets Narendra Modi in Mumbai as trade, education and the war in Ukraine top the agenda on his first visit to India. And gold prices pause after climbing past $4,000, but investors still bet on further gains. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. The Rail Deal with Tom Burgess-Watson will be coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours' time with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.